It's last call for football on FanDuel, with one last round of rewards every day through Super Bowl 60. One last week for one more chance. Visit the FanDuel app all week long for limited time boost every day until football runs out. FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 60.
New customers bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. 21 plus and present in select states. First online real money wager only. $5 deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit rg-help.com.
Hello, everyone. It is Jay Scott from the Hook Rocks, the Ultimate Rock Community Podcast. Good day to you. Hope you're listening and hope you're enjoying some good rock music. And today's guest is Christian Shields from Austin, Texas. He is appearing on the New Music Spotlight. Little background on my recent history with him. I was up late one night on Twitter and Mike from Keep Rock Alive, KRA_lives 2019, posted a song by Christian called Rock and Roll, and I was immediately blown away. And we started talking through direct message, and we set up this interview, and I'm thankful for it, and I'm thankful for him for doing this. How you doing today, Christian?
I'm well. How are you, Jay?
I'm doing good. And once again, thank you for appearing on the podcast. I do appreciate it, as I do with every guest. And we will start out the same way we do with a new guest, with the same question we always ask, and that is the essence of the show, which is, like every great rock song has a hook that sucks you in. Every rock fan has a moment, whether it's a song, an album, a band, or performance, that hooked them on rock and roll. What hooked you?
Well, for me, it would have to be Kiss. Kiss has always been my favorite band, and album or song, I always get flack for this because I was a fan of 80s Kiss first. And I think that stems from my mom with my siblings and I, when we were kids. My mom used to drive around, and she used to have the cassette of the Smashes, Thrashes, and Hits, Greatest Hits compilation in her car. And she'd always put that on. But I remember she used to fast forward this first track. Let's put the X effect, because obviously we were kids. I would say it would either have to be Heaven's on Fire, or it would have to be Tears Are Falling. One of those two.
You know, that's interesting because I am the same way. I was always aware of Kiss when I was real little, because you'd go to the grocery store and you'd see the Kiss toys in the toy section, you know, the Kiss phonograph or the Kiss Halloween masks and costumes. And I remember, being in the cart as my mother would, put the groceries on the conveyor, and I'd see the magazines with Kiss on the cover. So I was always aware of them. And then I saw on MTV the unveiling of of them taking off the makeup on I think it was on like a Monday or Tuesday night with Kiss, and they unveiled themselves for the Lick It Up album, and I saw the Lick It Up video, and there was Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, and there was Vinnie Vincent and Eric Carr. So my first introduction to Kiss was the non-makeup era, and of course then there was Heaven's on Fire with Animalize and Asylum, and that was great. And I had to go back to their catalog and listen to their older stuff, which I appreciate way more now than I did when I was younger and I was growing up. But that is interesting. Yeah, I mean, there was that era where, people like yourself and myself are more, or recognize the makeup era, not as much, I think, as the Kiss, but have more of appreciation for it.
Yeah, I mean, I always get flack for this too. I just think Paul Stanley wrote better songs in the 80s.
Talk about the history of Kiss. I mean, they had some outside writers as well, right? I mean, when you look at that,
Desmond Child.
Right, Desmond Child, but even like I think the first song that Desmond wrote with them was "I Was Made for Loving You" off the Dynasty album, which was still, of course, the makeup era. And then there was, I think Bryan Adams wrote a couple songs with Kiss. I think War Machine is one of those songs which is on the Creatures of the Night album, was written by Bryan Adams. And then, of course, I think Diane Warren, and there were other writers too as well. So, yeah, I do agree with you. I always enjoyed the Paul songs more as they went through the 80s. And I also think they had to do with Gene's focus on the band too. Gene was trying to be a movie star back then. And I mean, Paul Stanley even talks about this in his book and in other interviews, that he was pretty much running the ship. So Kiss was your first introduction that hooked you on rock. Was there an artist that made you want to pick up a guitar and perform?
Well, I think it was a combination, of like Kiss, Zeppelin, Sabbath, all that stuff. But I remember what made me want to pick up guitar was my dad had a bootleg VHS tape, if you remember VHSs, of Kiss's concert. I think it was like September 8th, 1977 at the Summit in Houston during the Love Gun tour. And I remember just like watching Paul Stanley playing guitar. He would just strum a chord and point at the girls. And I went, I want to do that. So at that moment, I wanted to play guitar from just watching that, because I thought that was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, that was their peak era too. When you talk about 76, 77 Kiss, with the big Destroyer album and the Love Gun and Rock and Roll Over, and then between the bookend of that era was Alive and Alive 2. That really was the prime era of Kiss. And I've seen some stuff on YouTube of that era too as well, and it's a whole nother level, performance and just a rawness to it. I mean, I'm a big Rock and Roll Over fan, because I love Take Me and I love Mr. Speed, but that whole era right there is just some really strong material.
Yeah, I mean, it's just watching that, and then also there was another show I think we had too. It was, I can't remember the date, but it was on the Dynasty tour. There was a show that they did in Largo, Maryland. And, even though, just to backtrack a little bit, I did say that, I think 80s Kiss, he started as a young kid. Obviously, when, my dad saw that my brother and I were starting to get into music, he started showing us more of the Kiss stuff that he had, and then more, he started getting us into, Sabbath, Iron Maiden, Zeppelin. He started spoon-feeding us that stuff. And then as we became, teenagers, we started, discovering more music and going on from there.
What was the moment when you wanted to write music, right? I mean, was there a song, again, you mentioned Kiss, the wanting to play live and wanting to pick up guitar, but, there's a difference between wanting to play and then wanting to write a song.
See, that's a tough question. The moment I wanted to write a song, I mean, it'd have to be right around when I first started playing guitar. My very first band I was in, I wasn't a singer. I was just a guitar player. And, I think I started, it was 13 or 14 is when I started writing, just basic, chord, patterns and all that stuff. I would have to say it's, right around then, because I started playing guitar when I was 12. So it might have been, it's somewhere in between there, in between 12 and 14. I'm not sure.
Okay. But, when you started writing lyrics, was there any moment that you wanted to say, hey, that really connected with me? I think I can do something like that.
Lyrics? It'd probably be around that same era as well.
Okay.
I can't remember what it was. I can't remember. It probably would be something from my first band, maybe a song that I had called Prisoner. Like I said, I'm not sure.
So tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, you've got this new album coming out in January, and, what is the history of Christian Shields?
Well, I grew up in Warwick, Rhode Island. I'm actually not from Texas. Throughout my teens, I played in two bands. I had a band called Only Ashes. That was the first band. And then I had a band called Last One Standing. And then around 2010, I formed a band with my brother called Dreamer. And then we went to New York to work on a record with a producer we had met. And we did that for like two years. We got some, label interest, but, the band ended up falling apart. And that was, during that time we had, opened for some big name guys like Saving Abel, Hollywood Undead, Hawthorne Heights, Candlebox, Lynch Mob, George Lynch's band, a bunch of Saliva. And then after that, I kind of took, after that band disbanded, I kind of took some time off. I did like a singer-songwriter thing. It didn't really gain any momentum, so I kind of abandoned that quickly. And then the same producer that I did that Dreamer record in New York, he had come back, he had moved down to Austin, and he was like, "Hey, I haven't seen you done anything in music in a little bit because I was still finding my way." He's like, "Why don't you come down to Austin? The music scene down here is great, and you can come and intern for me at my studio and, learn production side of things, and, you get a new project going." So we came down here, my brother and I, with a couple of friends in 2016, and we formed a band at that point that was just called Shield. And it was very, it was like alternative, like punk rock. And, we toured on that pretty heavily, did some big gigs at like the Whiskey A Go-Go and a couple other venues like Emo's Austin and stuff like that. We did that, and then, unfortunately, band disbanded, personality clashes, money, anything that breaks the band up. So then after that point, I decided, now I'm, 2019, I'm 28 now, but last year when that all fell apart, in 2018, I decided that I was going to, if I was going to do another music project again, I was going to work with people that I wanted to work with. I was just going to do it myself, because I had all these songs that I was sitting on that I had been writing, plus new ones that weren't getting approved by the production staff that we had. And I was like, you know what, I'm just going to do it my way. I'm going to pay for it all myself. Do it all myself. Maybe hire some session guys, because I got tired of the band thing, not because I don't enjoy being in a band, but because of, the personality conflicts sometimes. And I'm not saying that's all situations, but I'm saying for me, because, what works for one person doesn't work for somebody else. And I just basically wanted to do this the easiest way and the most efficient way possible. So, I did that. I met Kevin 131 Gutierrez, who's worked with Shinedown, Madonna, Bret Michaels, Paul McCartney. I met him at a club down here in Austin. He was just hanging out watching a show. And we were talking, and I told him, hey, Shields was still going on at this point, and this was right before Shields broke up. I was like, man, I might be, looking to record a couple of my own tracks outside of this. We were just talking, spitballing, and lo and behold, we ended up working together and doing a full record, and now here we are.
That's awesome. It's a great story.
Yeah.
Where,
Thank you.
You talk about, being in a band. I used to live with a rock band in my early 20s, and I got to see, the personality clashes up front. And, when you're dealing with four individuals that are predominantly A-type personalities, right? I mean, they all get into music because, they want to be front and center. I mean, even the drummer who's behind the thing, he still has his personality. The bass player does, guitar player does, vocalist, of course does. How, when you have a vision for a project, you have to mesh that with other people's visions. What are the negatives and what are the positives when something like that happens?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm going to start with the positive. I would say collaboration is always good. You get another perspective. You can get somebody who may be, a better musician in certain aspects than you that can bring some edge or something or some extra element to the table. And just to repeat it, I guess just perspective. But I would say negatives are some people being selfish and not putting the team. I always use terms like that. Putting the team first. Even though you're a band, you're a team. 3, 4, 5 people working towards a common goal. So, I would say the big negative is people not putting the team first, and then music unfortunately takes a back seat at that point. It's more or less a power struggle, and I get more writing credit. You've seen it play out. We've seen it play out with A-list artists all the way down to garage bands. I mean, it's the same all the way across the board.
So it had to be fulfilling, when you were putting together this project, and the music that you're writing for this project is pretty much your vision. I mean, this is what Christian Shields wanted to put out. Is that a correct statement?
Right. Yeah.
So let's talk about the album. I had the fortunate experience for you to send me the tracks and hear it before everybody else does. And it was, like I said, like the song Rock and Roll that I heard blew me away, and the rest of the record blew me away. I think, when I heard Not This Time, which was the first track on the album, I felt like there was a nod to Alda Nova. Is that correct? I felt that fantasy vibe to it.
Yes, that was exactly when we did that track. Kevin Gutierrez, the producer, he's a big Aldo Nova fan, and he's like, the original version of Not This Time, the demo, I would say was more similar to like the Scorpions, like in that vein, like Big City Nights, like Rock You Like a Hurricane. But he was like, we need to make a riff that, like, everybody can air guitar, and he we kind of like listened to some other songs to get some ideas, and he's like we should maybe do something similar to what Aldo Nova did on Fantasy, and then we came up with that. We came up with that arrangement, and I think it's 10 times better.
I agree. When I first heard it, I had a smile on my face. I'm like, this is a total tip of the cap to Aldo Nova Fantasy, and I enjoy it because I love that song, and I really had a fond appreciation.
Great song.
Yeah. Walk us through the process of making this record, writing it, demoing it, walk us through how your vision was put, coming out of the speakers at this point.
All right. So I've always been a huge classic rock fan. My roots have always been in classic rock. My parents were always big classic rock fans. I mean, they listened to modern stuff too, but, predominantly, 70s and 80s is what we listened to in the house growing up. So I cut my teeth on that. So that's precursor to this. When I was doing the last project, Shields was the last band I was doing, it wasn't classic rock at all. It was very modern, alternative. And not saying it wasn't something I wanted to do, but I felt like it wasn't like who I really was. So I decided that when that project disbanded, going back to like hiring the team that I wanted to work with, I wanted to get back to my roots. I wanted to basically make a record with songs that are timeless, and harking back to that podcast you did with I feel like a lot of songs now. Yeah, I feel like a lot of songs now they're not timeless. So and that's the thing. Like, why do these songs from the 70s and 80s stand up? So I wanted to write songs that were timeless, and I wanted to write stuff that was familiar, but I also wanted to write stuff that I wanted to listen to. I wanted to write stuff that I wanted to play. You know what I mean? I didn't want to chase trends. I didn't want to chase hits and all that stuff. So I basically wrote some of the songs. I demoed some of them at home, demoed some of them at the studio I was interning at, and then, went into there and talked to Kevin with a vision and said, hey, I want to do this record. And a little funny tidbit, we actually had to pump the brakes on the record because at the time he was like, we need to find a singer. Because he was like, your vocals aren't up to snuff. It's not that they're not good. He's like, they're like a 6. We need like a 10. So we put the feelers out for a singer. So I was open to that. I was like, whatever. I wanted to make the best possible record possible because if it was the last thing I ever did, I wanted to go out with on my proudest moment, so to speak, and do stuff that I want. So lo and behold, we didn't end up finding anybody, and he ended up hooking me up with a vocal coach. So I took 6 months of vocal coaching to get up to snuff to be able to sing these songs because the vocals needed to be killer. We wanted to be completely over the top. We wanted to be completely raw and aggressive. And we wanted to go for it. And not to put any bands down, but there's a lot of bands now that I feel they play it safe on their songs. They don't go for it. They don't do anything that's like that excitable for the listener. You know, I mean, when you listen to like Sebastian Bach, like he just goes for it. You know what I mean? And you listen to those vocals, and you're like, fuck yeah. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
we did that, and then we ended up at the beginning of this year, after I completed, after I felt I was ready to come back in and kill it. We went in, and then we finished the 2 tracks, because the record wasn't recorded all at once. It was recorded in batches of songs. So we stopped it literally after we had recorded 2 tracks, which were Rock and Roll and Raise 'Em Up. And then after we nailed the vocals on that, he's like, all right. And then we did the next batch of songs, which we did 3 songs. And then we did the final batch of 5 over the summer. So it was a long process, over a year, but I feel it was necessary to get the end result that we have.
Now, you talk about that process being over a year. When you think back to when you started with this vision that you had for this record to when it was completed, how did you evolve as an artist during that time?
I would say I got better. I got better as a writer. I got better as a performer. I got better as a musician. I had to take a step back because I was working with, upper caliber people, and I had to elevate to meet their standards. So I had to work harder. I had to, practice more, rehearse more. And I feel it was highly beneficial. If I didn't do that, I think the record would have been subpar.
Did you find that you had music when you started that as you evolved as an artist, some of that music didn't make it onto the record because what you were writing as you were evolving, you were continuing to write, and the stuff that you were putting out was better? Did you say, you know what, I'm not connecting with that stuff anymore, I want to pursue this newer stuff? Or did you rework some of the things that you were working on to get them on the record?
Nothing was started. We had to rework 2 or 3 of the songs. Like Not This Time was one of the songs that was reworked. Without You was another one. And By the Strings was another one that was completely reworked. So I felt that the hooks that I had in the songs were great. It's just some of the other stuff around it wasn't necessarily up to par. But like I said, working with Kevin, I consider a producer like a coach. You know what I mean? Their job, even though yes, you hire them to produce the record, I look at it as more of a perspective of like he's a coach. He's coaching you to be the best possible version of you can be.
There's an interesting history with the band Van Halen and how when they were recording their first album with Ted Templeman, Ted was concerned about David Lee Roth's vocals fitting in with the band with Eddie's guitar playing. And there was a moment when he was recording that album with them and he was producing that album that he wanted to replace David Lee Roth with Sammy Hagar, who just left Montrose. And this is in a book called Van Halen Rising, which is by Greg Renoff, which is an amazing book. It's about Van Halen's history prior to their first album. And he talks about the work ethic and the hard work that David Lee Roth put in to his vocals to stay in the band. And that was, an amazing aspect of the story about Van Halen.
I actually did not know that. That's interesting. I have to read that book. But that's basically, to make a similarity between the two situations is basically the record wasn't getting done unless I found a singer or unless I put the work in with the vocal coach. I mean, those were the 2 options.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, man. I mean, that you really, like you said, man, you went for it and you were able to produce.
I would say that, adversity is a good thing because when you overcome it, you always come out better.
Well, you always grow from adversity, right? I mean, you learn from the tough times. You learn from that adversity. That makes you a better artist. It makes you a stronger person. It makes you able to, rely on that experience of getting through adversity to get through any future tough times. So it is very important. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, I think without adversity, life would be pretty boring. I mean, I know that some days it sucks. You're like, oh man, I'm having a bad day. But, there's always a positive to be taken out of that. I try to look at the bright side of things, or try to look at, I try to look ahead a little bit if there's some things like going down, just to keep my head up, so to speak, just to see what's next on the horizon and to move forward.
You talk about the classic rock influence that you have, and you mentioned Scorpions, you mentioned Kiss. When you were putting together your vision for this album, what things did you want to take from? What things did you allow yourself to be influenced in your writing and your playing? Were there particular albums? Were there particular bands? I mean, outside of the ones that you named, how was that inspiration there for you?
Well, the inspiration from albums or bands, I would just say it's just I wanted to capture the element of arena rock, like all these guys have, or stadium rock on a record. I wanted it to feel very energetic, like those records. I wanted it to feel very three-dimensional. I didn't want it to sound like, background music. I wanted it to be, I wanted to write anthemic songs that, like, you're saying it by the second chorus, or, songs that you can feel and relate to. And I didn't want to write negatively. All these guys wrote very positively. They wrote about, good times, women, all that stuff. So I wanted to keep it very bright and fun.
And I mentioned that in a couple podcasts prior to yours with the band Kodiak about how, music that they're producing is like that era when it was fun. The Van Halen era of music, when it was about the fun, it was about the party. It wasn't too serious enough where, you'd have to think about what you're hearing. You're just out there rocking out with your fists in the air and you're having a good time. So the new album, like I said, very impressed with it. Rock and Roll was my first introduction to you, which if you haven't heard it yet, this is for my audience. If you haven't heard it yet, you got to check it out. It is a awesome track. It's got a great hook. I don't know. I know when I first heard it, I pretty much played it straight for like 2 hours. A great song. Yeah, Not This Time, another great track. I was really impressed with Lie to Me and By the Strings, too, as well, as we move forward with the record. Talk about those songs. How was the inspiration for those, and how were those put together?
Well, Lie to Me was a song that was written about how, like, I also wanted to keep the songs very simple in meaning. I didn't want you, like you said, not put that much thought into it, but I wanted you to be able to get exactly what I'm talking about right away. A lot of me is basically just about, like, how a lot of people are being very misled now. And, I just wanted to write a straight ahead groove track where it was just like, all right, man, I get this. And then By the Strings was basically written about, it's about this girl that I was really into, and she led me on for a while. So that's how that song came to be. We've all had one of those.
Correct. Absolutely. Then there was Can't Get Enough, another strong track. Here Comes the Man. Can't Get Enough is another rocker, too, as well, that I really enjoyed.
Oh, yeah. When Can't Get Enough, originally that song, that's another song that got reworked. The song was kind of like in a blues feel, kind of slow song, kind of similar to, I don't know if you're familiar with the band Steel Heart.
Yes.
Do you know the song Sheila?
Yes.
So it was kind of like in that vein, but Kevin, he was like, this song's got so much energy. He's like, we need to kick this up a notch. So then we basically double timed it and sped it up and turned it into that. And, the song's basically about how, you can't get enough of a certain someone. So, and then Here Comes the Man, I would say, I try to write a political track based on, obviously, identity politics and everything that we got going on in 2019. But it just made sense to what I see going on around me. And basically, it has a very heavy Southern influence from being down here in Texas. And, the main riff is actually a country lick that I like. And I was like, this would be cool playing this and then doing like kind of like a bluesy, grungy type chorus with this. And I wanted something to be memorable. And I wanted that song to be thematic and kind of take you on a journey. Everybody that I've showed it to, so I've showed it to a few people, they always say it reminds them of the Wild West. And I was like, yeah, I can see that.
The next tracks are Raise Them Up and All or Nothing, which All or Nothing is which is another song that connected with me too.
Yeah, All or Nothing is basically, it's like my attitude. You know, I want it all or nothing. Pretty self-explanatory, and basically, I wrote it basically. I'm going to get what I want. You know, and then Raise Them Up is basically just a song. This is just your basic rock anthem. You know, partying, raise the drink up, let's go, have a good time.
And the album ends with Without You and Off the Track, rather. Yeah, which I thought were both, again, I mean, there's not one weak track on this album. You could tell that this album had a lot of work into it and a lot of thought and and I think the process that you talk about really benefited you because there is no filler on this album. Every track is a strong track.
That was the goal. I'll touch on what the other two tracks are about, and then I'll touch on the whole album stuff. So Without You, every rock record needs a ballad, but I didn't want like a really like sappy ballad. I wanted something in the vein of like Skid Row, and also have like almost like a 70s classic rock vibe. And obviously, there's definitely a nod to Bon Jovi in there, with the 12-string, kind of similar to Wanted Dead or Alive. But I wanted a song that was really emotional, that you could feel, and I could really, we really wanted to show off the vocal range on that one. And then Off the Track is our nod to modern heavy rock. It's our nod to like how the arena stompers that we have around now. So all in all, then after putting this together, I was originally going to call the album Rock and Roll, but I'm like, meh. So then I decided, like, me coming out trying to make a statement, especially with the lead track Rock and Roll, which to me, that's released as the first single because I wanted to set an attitude. I wanted to set a precedent. But that's the story of, my life, but also I feel it appeals to everybody because, the chorus, rock and roll is all I know. 9 to 5 is not for me. You know what I mean? Like, nobody wants to work 9 to 5, and we all want to be rock stars. And so I decided, we just call the record, This Is Rock and Roll. Like, show everybody, like, in case anybody's confused as to what rock and roll is nowadays. No, this record is rock and roll.
That's the first thing that I thought of, too, when I heard the first track and heard the album. I mean, it's just a killer album. It's out January of 2020. What are the... What are the plans for the release? I mean, I know you talked about a new single coming out. What is, you got basically 2 months before this comes out. Talk about what you're going to do as far as getting this in front of people.
So, the next single is going to be actually not this time. We're going to release it on November 29th. And then I'll probably release the third single either the top of January or 2 weeks before the record release. The album comes out January 31st. And basically, I'm just working on promotion, building up the fan base, building up the awareness, and seeing where markets develop. And then sometime in probably early spring 2020 to the summer, I'll probably, depending on where the markets develop, I'll put together a band and I'll probably tour on it. I'm just not thinking that far ahead just yet. I mean, that will happen. It's just I want to make sure that the promotion and the marketing is there, and make sure that it gets the marketing and promotion that it needs.
With this album that you have coming out and the material that you have, what are some of the frustrations that you have with, you're sitting on some really good stuff, right? And it's a lot different than it was decades ago, where you could find an outlet or you could find something to put this out and, get on a tour and get this out in front of people. It's much easier for people to absorb it, either through radio or through MTV. That stuff doesn't exist anymore, So what are your frustrations? Because I've talked to other new bands about this too as well, about how there's really kind of a lack of infrastructure, and you kind of create your own infrastructure to move things forward, to get stuff in front of people.
Well, I wouldn't use the word frustration. I would say more or less challenges. And I would just basically say, is like you said, the labeled infrastructure isn't necessarily there for unsigned bands. But a lot of labels now are not going to invest in a band or an artist unless they already have an established following, or basically in layman's terms, unless they're making money. I mean, it's no different than any investor. An investor isn't going to invest in you unless you're investing in yourself. So, I kind of word it like this. Why am I going to give you, $250,000, $500,000 if you're not going to put $1 into your own career? Like, that's madness. It doesn't make any sense. So that being said, I would say the challenges are basically competition because of the internet, which is a great thing. You're competing, like bands need, when you put something out online, you're not competing at a local level anymore. You're competing globally. So, back in the day, like you talk about, and I've read up on this stuff, a lot of bands talk about how they made it in clubs in their hometown. Well, they had like something going on there and everybody went to that club to see that band. Whereas now, because of, internet and because of, advertising and stuff, that people have a million options versus the few. So the challenge is marketing and advertising. And I understand some bands don't have the budget or the money. Social media is help, but again, it's all these platforms are ad driven now. So unless you're paying for ads, you're realistically going to go unnoticed unless you're promoting by other means, via email list or something to that effect. So I would just say the challenge is you can't look at what's been done in the past. You got to look at today. You got to look at tomorrow. You got to look at next week, and you got to evolve with the time. I understand that some of these, and I kind of don't want to get discouraged, but I think these older bands or these more established bands are setting out the wrong precedent by telling bands, rock is dead, or they're saying that, the record label infrastructure doesn't exist. And it's like, you don't necessarily need a label. You can be an independent label and you have access to the same platforms the major labels do. You can advertise on YouTube. You can advertise on Facebook. You just got to figure out what's best for you and what works best. And, like I said, going back to these older bands, I feel like a lot of them don't even advertise. And some of them complain that, the record label is to promote the record or whatever. And it's like, a lot of these guys aren't on labels anymore. They completed their contracts and now they're independent. And they might just like it that way. They may not be selling 1 million records, but they might put out a record that sells, 20,000, 25,000 copies, and they're good for the year.
Right.
I just look at it from the perspective of adapt and overcome. Like, you just got to figure it out. Like, all these bands back in the day in the 70s, they figured it out. So you just got to work it. If one avenue doesn't work, you got to try other things. Just what's the expression? You throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. Sorry for such a long time.
That's interesting that you say that, because I agree with you a lot of what you say. But I think what really matters most with new music that you're putting out, existing bands are putting out, other new bands, is the fan response, right? I think the fan has not been able to reconnect with new rock music because they're so absorbed with classic rock. And when you look at radio markets, there's no infrastructure for new rock. There's no way for them to absorb it. And being a rock fan, you've got to put in a lot of work these days. You've got to go out and seek it out. It's not just there for you to get anytime you want. Well, it is, but it's not given to you, right? I mean, when I was younger, you had several radio stations in the market that I grew up in Chicago. You had MTV, you had other outlets, you had record stores that were playing new releases. You could go and check it out before you bought it. So you had all these avenues to do that. And I think the rock fan, in my opinion, and we've talked about this on other episodes, has gotten lazy with appreciating new rock music. And not just new bands and new artists like yourselves. I think also, too, like when you mention like bands that are putting out new music, like LA Guns put out a new record earlier this year, and the album is killer, right? You can't find that anywhere on radio in a regular market. You can't find that, you've got to go look for it on YouTube. You got to go look for it on their own fan page. So each band, each artist has to have their own infrastructure to get music out to people, but the fan needs to start listening, and I harp on this all the time. that, hey, there's some great new rock music. Christian Shields' new album is great new rock music. You got to listen. And when I hear back, oh, it's not the same, it's not like it's Led Zeppelin, there's no Led Zeppelin of the time, there's no Van Halen. Well, there's not supposed to be, right? There's not supposed to be bands.
No, there's not.
Yeah, each band, each era is their own entity, right? It's their own thing. If you're a baseball fan, if you're a sports fan, right? If you watch the Dallas Cowboys, and the Dallas Cowboys won Super Bowls back in the 90s, right? And are you going to stop being a Dallas Cowboy fan because Emmitt Smith's no longer on the team or Troy Aikman's no longer the quarterback? No, you're going to continue to root for your team, just like you should continue rooting for rock music, just like you should continue to appreciate new rock music. I mean, that's the essence of it. And when people talk about rock is dead, rock's never going to die. Rock is never, there's always going to be people playing rock music. Where I think rock is on life support is its relevancy on the business side. When you hear of, why aren't, the rock awards presented at the Grammys anymore? They're presented, off television. Or why is these artists now performing at Super Bowl halftime? Well, it's because fans have abandoned new rock music. And I'm talking. I'm not just talking about new artists. I'm also talking about like bands like Aerosmith or bands like, Kiss even said to before their end of the road tour, it makes no sense to put out a new record because people don't want to hear it, and that's an indictment of the rock fan. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are this: the fans vote with their wallet. If they like something, they're going to buy it. If they don't, they're not. And right now, because you're saying rock isn't a big market share of the music market, and it's right now all the money is in country or it's in pop, and this is where people are spending their money. That's why it's more relative. But I would say, the heart. I know you say the fans, but I would still say the bands. People are spoiled now. If you think about it, the device that you hold in your hand, you have the largest store, the largest encyclopedia, you have the largest access to information in the palm of your hand. And there's a lot of competition for people to get heard on that device because you can only look at one thing at a time. So I just think it comes back to marketing. The bands that stay relevant, it's because they're always marketing. And yes, certainly there's a nostalgia there with the older arena rock bands. And yes, certainly they're getting airplay on the radio and stuff, but they're still selling. So then that's why they continue to be relevant. So it kind of goes hand in hand. And the thing of it is, I don't think there's really an easy solution or an easy answer. Because again, I harken back to the statement, what works for me isn't going to work for you. You just basically, I think bands need to market more. And I think fans need to, if they like something, they need to support it more and keep it relevant. I would say it's like a joint partnership. The band doesn't exist without the fans and vice versa.
Chris from the band station said something to me as we ended our interview. He said that the new rock scene is planet Earth, where you can not be just localized anymore. You can connect with people across the globe. And Carl from La Chinga, who was our first guest on the episode, or on the New Music Spotlight, basically said it's so amazing when you're packaging up CDs and you're sending them out to Spain or South America or wherever. Whereas years ago, that never happened, right? I mean, if you were in a local scene, you were local until someone national recognized you. I mean, if you were based in Austin like you are now, and I'm in Chicago, and you were local, it'd be very difficult for me to recognize who you were. But now, with the power of the internet, that those walls are gone, right? Those boundaries are no longer there. And I think that's really cool. I think that's a whole new element that is brand new. I think where, like you said, I agree that there is no simple solution. I think, part of it is the fans' responsibility. I think part of it is the band's responsibility. I also think that when you talk about country has an infrastructure. Whether you like country music or not, you can't deny that, they have their own television channel, the country music television. They have 2 or 3 country stations in every market that plays new music. They have older artists that collaborate with newer artists to help them. I don't see that a lot with rock, and I think that is also a part that's missing too, is the infrastructure. When Christian Shields puts out Rock and Roll, which is a killer song, right? People should be all over it, and people should be like, let's push this through, let's get this through, let's go. And I think there's different avenues to do that. I just don't think we figure it out as rock fans, or the industry or the genre has not figured out how to put an infrastructure together for all these bands who are putting new music to get it out in front of more people. I think a lot of it is up to the bands. Like you said, you got to market yourself. You got to have subscriptions. You got to have likes. You got to do all that stuff. And we try our best here at The Hook Rocks to, showcase new artists every week. The fans got to come to it and help pursue those bands, get an infrastructure in place, get an outlet for this new music, so all these bands like yourself, these artists like yourself, can succeed.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no substitute for hard work. Collaborations are always good. It helps cross over fan bases. I think as far as marketing goes, you've got to go where the people are. Everybody's got a mobile phone. Everybody, looks at it when they wake up in the morning, when they're on lunch break at work, when they come home from work, whatever. So I think that, obviously it's been around for a decade now, and people have been marketing on there forever. But I think that, bands, got to market. You got to get in front of people, and instead of, I'm not saying playing shows is important. It is, but you could go downtown and flyer, which most cities don't let you flyer anymore because you get slapped with a litter ordinance or whatever it is. But YouTube is the best place to discover new music. People always discover on there. Even back when they had MTV, from what I was reading, I mean, this is before my time because I'm only 28. The record labels would compete to show their video more. Like, they would pay more money to show the videos on MTV and stuff, and they would get the ad revenue and all that stuff. So, YouTube's no different. And you can also highly target it. So I think bands need to think more in the business sense than music. And I know I'm going to get some flack for that, saying, oh, you're not a real musician, you're trying to do it for... No, that's not what it is. It's basically, if you want to do this to sustain yourself as a living, and if you want to pay the bills, then you gotta treat it like, you gotta treat it like a small business in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has their own private business and how you get in front of people. It's like, when you had a phone book years ago, how are people going to find you in a phone book, in a stack of pages? How are people going to recognize you? Yeah.
And I'm sure the way that they found people in the phone book is you paid for a 1-page ad in the phone book, so they found you. And the people that only got like the quarter-page ad or the third-page ad, I remember those, didn't get seen as much. It's no different. It's just, it's the person, what is the saying? The squeaky wheel gets the grease. The person that makes the most noise gets paid the most attention to, right? And that can be a negative thing and a good thing. I just think as far as marketing, like, it changes every day because the world's rapidly evolving. And that's why I use that adapt and overcome or survive or you die. And, you get the older bands. I've heard, Paul Stanley say, he's like, he goes, I'm not worried about record sales because my rent's paid. Well, okay, that's cool. You get it. I mean, but I don't think that they have a solution, but, Kiss stays relevant because they're always marketing something. And obviously the faces are iconic and all that stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you're just like, people gonna just understand that when, like I said, back to the thing, when you're on the internet, you're competing globally, like you said. Like, even like you were saying, that the feeling of shipping CDs out to Spain or whatever, you're global. As soon as you put something online, you're global. everybody all over the world can know what you're doing at the click of a button. And that's why it's so important you got to be careful what you post online, and, you got to make content, or you're going to make things that people / your fans want to see.
It's your brand, basically.
Yeah, it's branding. It's branding. And, it doesn't matter, people think, record labels, magic gatekeeper. Well, record labels spend millions of dollars on advertising to break a band, so to speak. How do you think they get a band notice? They advertise the band. It's not free. They don't have, sure, they have some channels that they advertise through, but it's not as easy as 1, 2, 3, because they could spend, they spent millions of dollars on bands that flopped, that nobody liked. So it's not a perfect science, and nobody has all the answers. It's just, I think the key is consistency, and the key is, the key is consistency, and I just think it's just marketing. I mean, I don't mean to repeat myself, but I'm just saying, it all circles back to one concept.
As we end here, we'll go back to the record. January 31st. These next 2 months are going to be building up to release that record, release those singles. I wish you the best of luck. I think this material is, like I said, man, like I told you in direct message, it is the goods. For those listening, if you like AC/DC, if you like Kiss, if you like the hooks from yesteryear that just suck you in and pull you in, you're going to like this record. It is pure rock and roll. It is put your fists in the air, let's have a party. It's good times. I think.
I was going to say, now I got to do the plug. So if you go to ChristianShieldsRocks.com, you can pre-order it now on iTunes, Google Play, Amazon. You can get hard copies from Bandcamp. Also, you can stream rock and roll on all the streaming services. You just got to go to ChristianShieldsRocks.com. It'll link you out to everything. You can follow me on Twitter at Chris_Shields23. You can follow me on Instagram at ChristianShields23. You can follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/ChristianShields. And YouTube does not have an official link yet because my subscriber count isn't that high. But if you go to ChristianShieldsRocks.com, it will link you out to all that.
Awesome, man. Awesome. I appreciate you doing this. It was a great conversation. I look forward to your success and seeing you grow as an artist. I look forward to this album coming out. Once again, Christian Shields, the song is Rock and Roll. I will be posting it regularly on my Twitter feed, and you can listen to it and you can give your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks again, Christian. I really do appreciate it. Once again, this is Jay Scott from The Hook Rocks, the Ultimate Rock Community Podcast, and we will talk again soon.
Thanks for having me, Jay.